All right, diving right in with you today, and I know you love this kind of stuff, those moments where, like, everything changes. And today is a big one, right? The fall of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a ripple effect, you know? So many things changed after that.
Okay, so let's set the scene. I mean, imagine a city literally divided, like cut in half by a wall. The Berlin Wall, right?
Right, yeah, the Berlin Wall. It was like this physical manifestation of this whole ideological struggle. You know, communism versus capitalism. The world's kind of holding its breath.
And people died trying to get over that wall. I mean, over 140 people just trying to get to freedom.
It was really November 9th, 1989. I think that's when it really hit people. This East German official, Günter Schabowski, he's giving this press conference, and he kind of messes up. Like, he makes it sound like these new travel rules are like effective immediately.
Wow, what a moment. So like people just start rushing the wall.
Yeah, they're flooding towards the wall, chipping away at it. They even had a nickname, the Wall Peckers. It was this incredible symbol of people breaking free.
I bet. And the guards? What were they doing?
They had a choice to make, right? Follow orders, open fire, but they didn't. They just let it happen. It was like the system crumbling right there in front of everyone.
Wow. And then the celebrations, right? People from both sides, hugging, drinking champagne. I get chills just thinking about it.
It was a powerful moment. But the wall coming down, that was just a symptom. Yeah. The real story is what was happening inside the Soviet Union. It was already breaking apart from the inside. We got to rewind a bit to really understand it.
Yeah, okay. Let's go back. So after Stalin dies, Khrushchev comes to power and things start to change.
Yeah.
I mean, they even called it the thaw, right?
Yeah. Khrushchev gives this speech denouncing Stalin, the brutality, the gulags. It was a huge shock.
Yeah.
And then he actually closed the gulags, eased travel restrictions. I mean, for people in the Soviet Union, it must have felt like a whole new world.
But he still wasn't afraid to use force, right? Like in Hungary in 1956.
Right. The Hungarian uprising. It's a good reminder that history's never like black and white. Khrushchev, he wanted reform, but on his terms, control was still key.
Yeah, makes sense. So it's like this back and forth, right? Reform, crackdown, and then the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, which really shakes things up.
Oh, absolutely. Khrushchev gets blamed for backing down to the U.S., and then Brezhnev comes to power. Now, he was a different kind of leader.
Yeah. Brezhnev, he was a hardliner. Yeah, what was that, the Brezhnev doctrine? Like, the Soviet Union had the right to intervene anywhere communism was threatened.
Exactly. Basically, no more of that thaw stuff. And he wasn't messing around. 1968, they invade Czechoslovakia, crush the Prague Spring reforms. Pretty chilling message, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely sent a message. And it wasn't just the politics, right? The economy under Brezhnev, people were struggling.
That's right. Shortages, you know, stagnant living standards. It starts to breed resentment, especially when you see how people in the West are living.
And then Afghanistan, 1979, the Soviets invade. They thought it would be quick, but...
No. It turned into their Vietnam, right? Drained their resources, showed their weaknesses. Wars, you know, they have a way of revealing the cracks in a system.
Interesting how both the U.S. and the USSR had their Vietnam experiences. You think that had an impact on, like, the way people saw their own governments?
Oh, I think so. It wasn't just military defeats. It was about pride, about trust in the system. But while all this is going on, something else is brewing. Something that showed, you know, the power of people.
You're talking about solidarity in Poland with Lech Walesa.
Yeah. I mean, he was just an electrician, but he became this symbol of resistance. The strikes at the Gdansk shipyards, the 21 demands. Solidarity was about more than just wages. It was about workers' rights, about having a voice.
And they got a lot of support, right? Not just in Poland, but globally. Even Pope John Paul II backed them.
He did. It was huge.
Yeah.
You have John Paul II, Reagan, Thatcher, all these figures pushing against the Soviet system. The pressure was mounting, both from inside and outside.
Yeah. Okay, so all of this sets the stage for Gorbachev, right? He comes to power in 1985 facing like a mountain of problems.
Yeah, he inherited a mess. And he decided to gamble on these two big reforms, Glasnost and Perestroika.
Glasnost, that was about openness, right? And Perestroika, restructuring the economy.
Yeah, huge changes. But it's like when you open a window in a stuffy room, you get fresh air, but you also get like unexpected consequences. Take Chernobyl, for example.
Chernobyl, right. The nuclear disaster in 1986, suddenly everyone could see the problems with the Soviet system, how things were being hidden.
Exactly. Chernobyl was a disaster on so many levels. It destroyed trust in the government. And it fueled this desire for more openness, more accountability.
And that desire for change, it wasn't just in Russia, right? It was spreading throughout the Soviet republics.
That's right. The irony is that Gorbachev's reforms, they were meant to save the Soviet Union, but they actually helped to break it apart. He loosened control, and it gave power to those who wanted out.
And that's where Yeltsin comes in, right? This charismatic leader, not afraid to challenge the system.
Yeah, Yeltsin, he was a force. He wanted democracy, more autonomy for Russia. He was basically going head-to-head with Gorbachev.
And then the coup in 1991. Hardliners tried to take over, put Gorbachev under house arrest, but they didn't count on Yeltsin.
Right. That image of him standing on a tank, rallying people against the coup, that was a defining moment.
Yeah.
The coup failed, and it was like the final nail in the coffin for the Soviet Union.
Yeah. Wow. So by December of 1991, it was all over. Yeltsin, along with the leaders of Belarus and Ukraine, they signed the Belovezh Accords, and that's it. The Soviet Union is dissolved.
Incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
A superpower just gone.
Yeah.
Like it was all holding on by a thread, and then snap. But the story doesn't end there.
It's kind of hard to wrap your head around, like 1 minute, this massive empire, the Soviet Union, and then poof, it's just gone. What happened next? Did everybody just chill out? Was it all peace and harmony after that?
Well, there was definitely this feeling of optimism in the air, especially in the West, like in the U.S. People were talking about a new world order, democracy and free trade spreading everywhere, global prosperity, everyone working together.
Right. And there were signs of that, weren't there? Like the World Trade Organization got started, the European Union expanded, the world was getting smaller, more connected.
It felt that way for sure. But, history's never that neat and tidy, is it? Things got complicated. I mean, look at the Balkan Wars in the 1990s. Brutal conflicts showed that old hatreds and ethnic tensions, they didn't just disappear because the Cold War was over.
Yeah, those were rough. I mean, Srebrenica, that was awful. Made you wonder if anything had really changed. Did we just trade one set of problems for another?
It's a good question. And then there's the whole issue of nuclear weapons. More countries started getting them. India, Pakistan, North Korea. We had the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but it wasn't enough.
So the threat of nuclear war, it didn't go away. It just got, more complicated.
More players, more uncertainty. And for the U.S., well, they were suddenly the only superpower left. That came with a lot of responsibility, but also a lot of questions. Could they really manage a world this complex?
The Gulf War in 91, that seemed like a pretty clear victory for the U.S., right?
Yeah.
Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait. U.S. leads a coalition, kicks him out in a few weeks?
Right. Showed what American military power could do.
Yeah.
But then you have Bosnia and Kosovo later in the 90s, and those were a lot messier, a lot more difficult.
Yeah. It wasn't just good guys versus bad guys anymore. More like a million shades of gray.
Exactly. All these different factions, ethnic groups, religious tensions. The old Cold War playbook, it didn't really apply anymore.
And just when everyone was starting to get used to this new kind of messy world, we had 9/11.
Yeah. September 11th, 2001. Changed everything, really.
It did. I mean, the impact, not just on the U.S., but on the whole world, it was huge. It was like this wake-up call that even in a globalized world, violence and terror could still reach anyone, anywhere.
It ushered in the war on terror. A whole new kind of war, really. Not about containing countries, but about fighting these shadowy networks, like Al-Qaeda.
And the U.S. response, it was fast, right? The invasion of Afghanistan, trying to take down the Taliban who were protecting Al-Qaeda.
Right. And at first it seemed like it worked. They got rid of the Taliban pretty quickly. But then it turned into this long, drawn-out conflict.
A quagmire. No matter what they did, it just kept going.
It showed the limits of military power.
Yeah.
Right. You could win battles, but winning the peace, building a stable country, that was a whole different challenge.
And then in 2003, the U.S. invaded Iraq.
Right. And that decision, well, it's still being debated today.
Yeah. The whole thing about weapons of mass destruction ties to terrorism, turned out that wasn't really true.
No, it wasn't. And Iraq, well, it descended into chaos. Sectarian violence, the rise of ISIS. It was a really tragic chapter.
So both Afghanistan and Iraq, they kind of showed the downsides of American power in this post-Soviet world, trying to create a new world order, but things not really going according to plan.
Yeah. It wasn't the clean victory for democracy and freedom that some people had hoped for. The world after the Cold War, it became much more uncertain, much more dangerous in many ways.
We went from this world dominated by two superpowers with rules to something much more fluid, more unpredictable. Who knows what's going to happen next?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It's wild, right? While all this is happening, there's this other story unfolding, a new player stepping onto the field.
Yeah, China. I mean, their rise has been incredible. In just a few decades, they went from this isolated economy to a global powerhouse. It's remarkable.
It's like they were watching the U.S. and the USSR duke it out, just like biding their time.
I think there's some truth to that. They were very strategic, very pragmatic. Like Deng Xiaoping, he said, it doesn't matter if a cat is black or white as long as it catches mice. It was all about results.
And those results, they're hard to ignore. They opened up to the world, embraced market reforms, and maybe they bent the rules a bit along the way. But now, I mean, they're right up there with the U.S.
It's the rivalry of the century, really, the U.S. and China. But it's not the same as the Cold War, is it?
No, not at all. It's not just about communism versus capitalism anymore. It's way more complex.
It is. It's about economics, technology, global influence. Two very different visions for the future.
And then there's Russia. I mean, they may not be a superpower anymore, but they're still a major player.
Oh, absolutely. Especially with Putin in charge. They've been more aggressive, haven't they? Look at what happened in Georgia, Ukraine, Syria.
Yeah, and they're really good at, like, information warfare, trying to stir things up in the West.
Right. It shows that even though the Cold War is over, a lot of those old tensions, they're still there, simmering under the surface.
So we've got this U.S.-China rivalry heating up, Russia doing its thing. And then on top of all that, we have climate change, pandemics, all these global issues.
It's a lot, isn't it? The world feels so interconnected, but also really fragmented, full of possibilities, but also a lot of danger.
So where does that leave us? I mean, after this whole deep dive into the fall of the Soviet Union, what have we learned? What does it mean for us today?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that history doesn't always move in a straight line. People thought the end of the Soviet Union would bring peace and stability, but things got a lot messier. The world is more unpredictable now.
And we're still figuring it all out, right? Like the consequences of what happened back then, we're still living with them today.
We are. So as you think about this, I'd say, remember this. The past, it's never really over. It shapes the present, even if we don't always realize it.
It's a good reminder that history isn't just dates and names. It's about understanding the forces that shape our world, how things change, and how we got to where we are today. And maybe, just maybe, if we understand the past, we can make better choices for the future.
I like that. I think that's a great place to leave it.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a wild ride.